You've probably heard this idea online, that societies in Africa and parts of Asia relied on oral traditions simply because they didn't know how to write. But that claim collapses the moment you look closer. The real question isn't why these societies didn't write more, but why they deliberately chose to keep certain knowledge oral. Because in many cases orality wasn't a limitation, it was a strategy. Writing systems were well known across these continents. Think of griots in Ethiopia, Ajami scripts in West Africa, or the widespread use of Arabic, Sanskrit, Pali, and Chinese. Yet, alongside these literate traditions, huge bodies of knowledge were kept oral by design. This wasn't ignorance. It was a system of control, protection, and adaptability. In many societies, knowledge wasn't just neutral information. It was power, social, spiritual, and political. And power, if written down carelessly, could be stolen, misused, or stripped of its sacred context. Oral transmission was the solution. It ensured that knowledge stayed within trusted family lines, among trained specialists, and was always tied to a sense of moral responsibility. Security was a major reason. A written text can be taken, but oral knowledge has to be earned. In many African societies, critical information like metallurgical techniques, medicinal formulas, spiritual rituals, and political history was only passed down to initiates. You didn't just learn the information. You had to prove you were worthy of it. Take the griots of modern-day societies in West Africa. They weren't just entertainers. They were living archives, historians, genealogists, diplomats, and legal witnesses. Their job was to preserve history with absolute accuracy through performance and repetition. A griot's training could last for decades, and any mistake made in a public performance would be immediately corrected by other griots present. This wasn't casual storytelling. It was a rigorous method of historical preservation, all without paper. Another key advantage of orality is flexibility. Written knowledge is fixed, frozen in time. Oral knowledge is alive. It can adapt. For societies facing changing climates, shifting trade routes, or political turmoil, oral systems allowed their history, laws, and ethics to evolve without losing continuity. This flexibility kept knowledge relevant, not rigid. This was especially true for law. Many African legal systems were oral because law was meant to respond to human context. Customary law wasn't about memorizing rules word for word. It was about interpretation, debate, and negotiation. Writing it down would remove all that nuance, eliminate the role of mediation, and reduce justice to a set of cold rules instead of wise judgment. Orality allowed wisdom to remain human. Then there's the issue of sacred control. In both African and Asian traditions, certain knowledge was considered dangerous if it fell into the wrong hands. Spiritual texts, powerful rituals, and entire cosmologies were often restricted. Among African priesthoods, Islamic scholars, and Buddhist and Hindu monastic orders, knowledge was deliberately layered. There were public teachings for everyone, restricted teachings for dedicated students, and secret initiatory knowledge for the most trusted few. Writing everything down would completely flatten these essential boundaries. In Islamic societies, memorization of the Quran was, and still is, deeply revered. A Hafiz, one who has memorized the entire text, doesn't just know the Quran, they embody it. Similarly, Buddhist and Hindu monks memorized vast collections of sutras, chants, and philosophical texts. For them, orality wasn't backward. It was a spiritual discipline, a method for internalization and perfect precision. We often think of memory as weak because we've outsourced it to our phones and computers. But in these cultures, memory was a technology. They developed sophisticated techniques like rhythmic structures, poetic formulas, and systems of communal verification. These tools made oral knowledge surprisingly durable and accurate over centuries. So why is this still debated? Because modern culture tends to equate written records with legitimacy. If it's not written down, it's often dismissed as unreliable, mythical, or just plain inferior. But that's a cultural bias, not a universal truth. When colonial observers first encountered these societies, they saw an absence of writing and assumed an absence of knowledge. What they were actually witnessing were highly controlled, sophisticated knowledge systems that they simply didn't understand. When we dismiss oral traditions, we risk losing entire philosophies, erasing histories, and breaking intellectual lineages not because they didn't exist, but because they didn't exist in a form we recognize. Ultimately, oral tradition wasn't a failure to write. It was a conscious decision about who knowledge belonged to, how it should be shared, and when it needed to adapt. Understanding this doesn't romanticize the past. It restores its complexity. And it reminds us that not all wisdom was meant to be archived on a shelf. Some of it was meant to be lived. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, consider subscribing for more.